You're listening to the Family Podcast from PursueGOD.org.
Okay, couples, today we are going to talk about the seasons of marriage. And this is based on the book by Gary Chapman, who's wrote so many other great books. For example, the love languages, the apology languages, and then he has this book on the seasons of marriage. We also on PursueGOD.org have a video that Rick and Kay Warren had done about the same topic. So you could go to PursueGOD.org to see that. But I just thought it was an interesting idea and way to kind of look at the flow of marriage. Because the longer you're married, you kind of ebb and flow through good times and harder times and challenging times and times of growth and times of change. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight some of these principles to help you as a couple to identify the season you're in. What does that season represent? Why is that where you are? How can you grow together as a couple in that season? Because even if it's a good season, there's still things you need to do to safeguard your marriage. And certainly in the harder seasons, there's definitely things to do to safeguard your marriage. So we're going to tackle this today and see where it takes us. I hope that it'll be helpful and insightful for you. So Ecclesiastes 3:1-4, this idea of the ebb and flow of life is well represented, and it's a popular passage. I'm going to read it here. For everything there is a season, a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. So you can see represented in this passage that Solomon is speaking to this idea that there's good seasons and hard seasons of life. And again, as everything that we tackle, biblically speaking, none of these great insights that different authors or therapists that get a name out there, these ideas, these insights really come from God himself and from his word. And so I want to just make sure that for you guys as couples, that you have some tools to identify where you are, what season of marriage, and what you need to do to really grow through it. Because as Ecclesiastes says, there's going to be ups and downs. And so depending on what season you're in, you might need to be readying for harder seasons, or you might need to know like better seasons are ahead. Okay, so having that as our setup, we're going to start with winter. And winter is described as the season of challenge. Maybe that's where you are as a couple right now, where maybe you feel lonely, discouraged, hopeless. Perhaps there's been an affair. Maybe your spouse lost their job. Perhaps you had a bad health diagnosis or your kids are struggling. Whatever it is, winter is the season of challenge. Lonely. I mean, if you picture what winter can be on a snowy day, sometimes there can be peace to that. But for a lot of times, we feel closed in. We feel like we want to see the sun. The color of gray and the gloom kind of encompasses everything. So maybe that describes you today. You feel cold and isolated, and you feel really far apart from your spouse. So if that's you, if that's the season that you're in, your challenge is going to be finding ways of emotionally supporting your spouse. Because here's the thing. You're both experiencing the winter season. You're both in a season of challenge. So you have a choice. You can do that alone. You can struggle alone, or you can struggle together. I will never forget, this was years ago. Bryan and I were maybe 8 years into marriage. Our kiddos were young. I think it was 3 and 5. And he had this lump in his back that we thought was like a muscle knot. And finally, we're like, we should probably just have you go check that out. And we go to the doctor, and a doctor does a CAT scan, and the doctor's like, oh man, I've got bad news for you. This is a tumor, and it looks like it's eaten away your rib. You need to go to like a cancer specialist down in Salt Lake. So all of a sudden, we're just a young couple, young in ministry, young in our family. And suddenly this health diagnosis is put us on our back heels. And I just remember so many times, which by the way, spoiler alert, for us, it was a misdiagnosis, thank the Lord. And we did go to cancer specialists. We did all of that and had many weeks of wondering if Bryan was going to be able to survive this. But in the end, it was just a benign tumor that was removed, and we've never had to think about that again. Now, I know for a lot of you, that's not the story. And so I don't want to minimize that at all. I recognize that for us, that ended up to be a huge blessing, and it was a short-term winter season in that regard. But I do remember making my son's bed one morning and just starting to cry, crying out to God, saying, Lord, I'm young. I don't understand why you would want to take Bryan away. Our church was young. Our kids were young. I don't like the story you're writing. And I want to wake up from this nightmare. And I just remember that Bryan and I both had our own journey of just trying to process this. I think Bryan was trying to protect me from the fear that he had. And I was trying to protect him from the fear that I had. And we just had to find ways to try to connect through that even though Bryan's experience was different because it was his body, he was having to go through all the tests and all the different things. He's the one that had to go through surgery. But I also was going through it as the helpmate and, trying to serve him and help him and take care of the kids and make sure things were running at home. And I just remember feeling like that was a real season of challenge for us. And I can see how it can derail couples very quickly, that you just kind of retreat to your own thoughts and feelings and fears. And maybe you start to resent your spouse because they don't seem emotionally present for you when you need them. And then because of your own journey, you're not really there for your spouse. So you can see how it could create a lot of distance and disconnection. And so if that's where you are and you're hearing these words that I'm saying and what I'm describing, and you're saying that's exactly where we are. We are in a winter season. We are in a time of challenge, and we have distanced ourselves from each other. I implore you to sit down and talk to your spouse about the season, about where you feel lonely, about why you feel discouraged, about the areas where you're feeling hopeless, and together talk about it, support one another, strategize things that you could do to still find hope in a time of challenge, and pray together and bring other people or other resources in to help you in this season. Because just like the actual seasons that change comes, right? Winter does turn into spring. And so better days can be ahead. But when you're in the middle of a winter season of challenge, it can feel like this is my reality and it's never going to change. Now, Ecclesiastes 4:9-12 goes on to say this. So I want you to hear this, couples that are in a season of winter. 2 people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out to help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. Likewise, 2 people lying close together can keep each other warm. But how can one be warm alone? A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but 2 can stand back to back and conquer. 3 are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. And that third piece really needs to be Christ at the center of your marriage. So even again, Solomon is speaking to this idea that if you are in a season of challenge, that you and your spouse more than ever need to stand together. Because if you are just alone and are fighting the battle alone, you're not going to have the best chance to succeed than if you guys come together and say, this is a tough season. We both have our own struggles through this. Maybe one of you has failed the other. There's broken trust, but do the work to say, but through Christ working in us, there can be better seasons ahead. So what do we need to do to find common ground, to find productive steps to move forward? If it's a kid struggling, how do we pray for our child? What are some resources out there that maybe we need to start to tap into so we're not fighting this battle alone? So couples, if that is you, I'm just praying that you will connect to your spouse, connect to Jesus, and work together through this season of challenge. Now, spring. This is when we transition to, and of course, this doesn't always happen in succession, right? It's not like if you are promised that the winter season always becomes a spring season. But spring is what we call the season of busyness. So when you think about spring, it's like all new things growing. We're kind of coming out of the winter season where everything's dead and gloomy. The spring season of marriage is the busy season of your marriage. Probably running your kids around to every practice or club or all the school activities and the things that they're doing. The spring season is the busy season where it's very easy to lose connection to your spouse because you're maybe busy building your career or busy in your ministry, or like I said, just getting your, just all the needs that our kids have, it's very easy just to kind of be two ships passing in the night, or kind of walking on parallel tracks, like you're together, but you're not really bonding because there's too many other distractions going on. So for couples in the spring season, you need to be intentional about times of connection. In fact, in the video I mentioned on Pursue God, Rick and Kay Warren suggest 3 things if you're in the season of busyness that you need to divert moments in the day to recharge as a couple. So like for Bryan and I, when our kids were younger and we were kind of running around a lot, every night after dinner, we would call it's mommy and daddy time. And we'd go sit on the couch and the kids had to, do a puzzle or play a game together or just kind of do their own thing, because this is dad and I's time to connect and just kind of talk through the day, what's been going on. And that was our time to kind of recharge as a couple every day. And that's what Rick and Kay called that divert, that you just find moments every day. It could even be just 15 minutes where you just kind of connect as a couple. For some of you, maybe that needs to be when the kiddos are in bed, whatever. Just finding some time in the day that you just don't let days and weeks go by where you're not even having meaningful conversation with your spouse, because that's going to affect all sorts of things in your physical intimacy as well. If you start to feel that disconnection because you're so busy, that's going to start creating, a domino effect. So divert every day. And then they say a weekly withdraw, like having a day of rest where you spend time as a couple or as a family. So for some of you, again, depending on your budgets, like it would be really nice if you could go on a date every week and, go to dinner or whatever, go on a hike without the kids. Some of you, that might again be, we're lucky to get a walk-in, or it might just be when the kids go to bed, but that every week you find a day where you turn off the phones, you're not talking about work, and you're just connecting as a couple and as a family. And then they suggest abandon yearly, where you go on a vacation, and their encouragement is you go away as a couple. And again, I recognize, that's certainly for Bryan and I in our younger years where money was tight. We weren't taking a vacation every year, but you can do some staycation ideas where you can find some babysitters that you could just get away for maybe a night, or even if you just do some day activities throughout the course of a week where you just can go and have some time as a couple. Those are great things to divert daily, to withdraw weekly, and abandon yearly, where you can slow down the busy season that you might be in to still connect as a couple. Because again, as I started the whole topic today, identifying the season you're in is important, but then it's important to recognize, okay, what could cause distraction or problems in our marriage in the season? So for winter, it's that you just go it alone, that you just kind of pull away from your spouse because things are hard and challenging. In the spring season, you can still find yourselves not connecting because you're so busy doing everything else. You're not making the marriage a priority. So for those couples that you're like, yep, that's us. And I remember this. There were many seasons where Bryan and I were having to divide and conquer, where we had a son doing, basketball and a daughter playing volleyball, and, you have tournaments and things going on. So, I get it. And the more kids you have doing activities, the crazier it gets. So I get it. But couples, if that's you need to find ways to connect as a couple. It needs to be intentional, because otherwise time will just get away. And before you know it, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, hello, stranger. I haven't talked to you in 3 weeks. So if you're a couple in the spring season of busyness, make a point to stay connected, or else the marriage is going to struggle. Okay, now let's transition to the summer. This is the season of contentment. And this is probably a season where everyone's like, oh man, I haven't felt that yet. I can't wait. I honestly can say, I feel like Bryan and I have been in a summer season up until about 9 months ago. I'll explain more in a minute. But the summer season is just the ease of marriage, where it's just everything's kind of cruising along. Things are going smoothly. You feel connected as a couple. There aren't major stresses in your life. It's like summer, just taking a walk with the warmth of the sun and drinking your lemonade, and, just like it's light out till 10 p.m., just a time of peace and just relaxation. And so couples, if that's the season you're in, awesome, great, good for you. What you need to do in the season of summer is work hard at investing in your relationship to ready yourself for the harder seasons that might be ahead. So don't get complacent and don't expect that this will be the season that we're in forever because, change comes along, challenge comes along. So if you're in the season of contentment, make sure that as a couple, you're just being intentional, thankful, like thanking God every day for these easier days and to prep your hearts to be ready for another season that might not feel quite as content, if you know what I mean. And when I say that Bryan and I were in a summer season, like with our kids graduating from college and starting their careers, there was a time there where it was just fun that the four of us, like we could take some vacations together and just really enjoyed time as a family of four. It was just really fun, a season in our ministry that was just rewarding and great. And it was just a wonderful time. And it still is a wonderful time, but we then have transitioned in the last 9 months into the season of fall, which is the season of change. So fall is, and change isn't bad. Like what I'm going to share about our season of change, it's not that all that change is bad. It can be wonderful and amazing, but it's still change. There's still maybe a grieving that you go through. So for us, it's been the empty nest. In the last 9 months, our son moved across the country in his career. So that was just kind of all of a sudden a loss. I just remember watching his car drive out of our driveway, thinking this car will never be parked in my garage again. Like that was a big change. It was a change in our family dynamic for sure. And then a month later, our daughter ended up meeting a wonderful young man and they're getting married in a couple of months. So that's been another change in my relationship with my daughter that now, where I used to be her sounding board and kind of her support, she now has that in her fiance, which is the way it should be. But as a mom, I've been in this season of change. And I'll be honest, at first, I didn't really recognize why I was kind of conflicted. Like I've prayed for my daughter to meet a wonderful, godly man. I mean, since she was a baby. So you would think like when that all happened, that it would just be all, lollipops and great. And it is mostly, but there was a part of me that was grieving the loss of relationship that was changing with my daughter and certainly changing with my son, who now I don't see every day and we don't talk every day. And he's experiencing things that I don't know about because I'm not there living it with him. So we've kind of gone from a summer season where things were just kind of moving and shaking and great to a season of change, which it's all wonderful change, but I have noticed that for me, there's still grieving. So for some of you, maybe it's, you've moved across the country with your spouse's job. Maybe it's just adjusting to a new school year with your kids, or for others of you, maybe you guys have an empty nest situation as well. So whatever it is, or unfortunately for some of you, maybe there's a change, like a divorce has happened or a death has happened. So fall can be a mix of good change and bad change. But no matter what it is, it's the ability to recognize what's changed and how that impacts you, talking about that with your spouse and saying like, how do we grow? How do we take these experiences and these changes and have a different perspective on it, or a fresh perspective or a new perspective? And how are we going to grow as a couple through this change? So for Bryan and I wouldn't say, I think Bryan certainly was sad when our son drove away. In fact, I know he was sad. We all were very emotional, but I think his grieving has looked different because his relationship with our kids is a little different than mine, because I had been kind of the primary day-to-day take care of things. And all of a sudden, a lot of those roles weren't needed anymore. So for me, there was a different level of adjustment to all of that. And so Bryan and I just had to talk through that I had to just kind of explain to Bryan. It's like, I feel like I retired from a job. So maybe some of you relate to that, where all of a sudden it's like, you don't go to the office anymore. Like that part of who you are that defined you is just not there anymore. So I had to kind of grieve that and move through that. And so if this is where you would define yourself, that you're in the fall season of change, pay attention to what's changed, how that's impacting you. Share that with your spouse so you can grow together through it. Because it could be very easy in the season of change where if one spouse is better with change than the other, it can be something that can become divisive. You might feel like if you're struggling more, your spouse might be insensitive or not really getting it or not meeting you where you need them to be emotionally. Like, hey, this has been hard for me. So there needs to be more communication through this. There needs to be patience. There needs to be grace in this season of change. 1 Corinthians 13 describes love as patient and kind. It's not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It doesn't demand its own way. It's not irritable. It doesn't keep any records of wrong. It doesn't rejoice about injustice, but always rejoices when the truth wins out. It never gives up. Love never loses faith. It's always hopeful and endures through every circumstance. So I think if you're in the season of change, and especially if you feel like maybe your spouse is handling it differently than you, just make sure that you remember that the quality of love is to be patient and kind, to work through those things, to not be irritable and not be honest about why you're irritable. For a lot of marriages, this is what happens in the season of change. You just become more and more combative and frustrated with each other. So you really need to work hard at growing together and communicating through it and never giving up, right? Because change can be hard. If you've been moved across the country, maybe for you, it could be hard to not want to be bitter at your spouse. Like, I didn't want to move. This isn't what I had in mind. The kids are struggling, and it could be easy to fall into the bitterness and resentment cycle. And so that's why it's really important to be reminded of, okay, what do I need to communicate through? I don't want to hang on to this and become bitter and resentful. How do I use my words to be clear and to share my perspective, but to do it in a way where love wins out, right? Where in the end, your marriage grows from the time of change rather than suffers. Okay, so we've covered the 4 seasons. I mean, again, to me, it's just an interesting concept to think about maybe where you are in your marriage right now. And especially if you're struggling, to identify the season and where the challenges are and how you guys need to work, and to be intentional about coming back together and staying united and being one through the good and the bad times. Because as Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, there's a time to dance and there's a time to mourn. Like, that's just part of the experience that we have in this broken world. And so we need to be ready for it, whether we're in the good seasons where we just need to store up those good things, that great time of connection as a couple, to be ready for a different season of maybe winter or fall, but that we're always growing and we're always putting Christ at the center of it, whatever it is. So again, just a quick review. Winter is the season of challenge. Spring is the season of busyness. Summer is the season of contentment, and fall is the season of change. And my prayer for you guys as a couple is, whatever the season, that you will just get on track with one another, keep Christ at the center of it, and move through that season knowing that, especially if you're in the harder seasons, better days are ahead.
Thanks for listening. If you haven't already, please consider rating our podcast. It's a simple way to help us reach more people. Find more resources to talk about these topics with your small group, family, or mentor on PursueGOD.org.